The city smelled of smoke, decay, and fear. Elara pressed her hands against the rough walls of the caravan, trying to steady her trembling fingers. She had been sold to pay her family's debt, a debt she had no part in creating, yet it now chained her like iron. Her heart beat fast as the towering gates of the royal city loomed above her, black stone cutting into the sky like jagged teeth. The guards at the entrance regarded her with cold eyes, and she kept her head bowed, hoping invisibility could be a shield. She had traveled far from the fields of her village, past forests where shadows whispered and rivers that carried nothing but silence. Each step into the city felt heavier than the last. She had heard stories of the king, Kalen the Alpha King they called him, a man who ruled with a hand of iron, a ruler who demanded absolute loyalty. Stories said he took what he wanted and crushed those who opposed him. Most whispered his name in fear, yet some said there was more to him, a fire that burned beneath his cold exterior. When the caravan halted in the courtyard, Elara's breath caught. The palace rose before her like a dark monument, towers scraping the clouds, windows glowing with faint light. Servants and slaves bustled about carrying trays of food, scrolls, and treasures. The air hummed with the tension of unseen eyes watching her every move. She was dragged before the throne hall, her legs weak, her body aching from the journey. The guards shoved her to her knees and a hush fell over the hall. Courtiers whispered, some sneering, others curious. They had seen countless slaves pass through these doors, yet something about her, the defiance in her eyes, the stubborn set of her chin, made her stand out. The doors opened, and Kalen entered. The hall seemed to shrink under his presence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair dark as midnight and eyes that could pierce the soul. His gaze fell on her, and Elara felt a chill creep up her spine. "You," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Who are you?" "I am Elara," she replied, steadying herself. I'm here to serve, my lord." Her words trembled slightly, but she refused to let fear control her completely. Kalen studied her for a long moment. He circled her slowly, like a predator inspecting its prey, yet there was no malice in his movements. Instead, there was curiosity, a question that seemed to hover in the air. What did she have that others did not? "You carry yourself like you belong somewhere else," he said finally, his tone almost a whisper. "Do you?" Elara swallowed hard. "I do not know, my lord. I only know I am where I must be." A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face, a shadow of interest. Most slaves would have cowered, groveled, begged for mercy. She had done none of these things. "Very well," Kalen said, turning away. "She will stay in the servant quarters. But watch her. If she tries to step beyond her place, punish her." His command was not loud, yet it carried weight that silenced all around him. Elara was escorted to a small, dim room beneath the palace. The walls were cold stone, the air damp, and the only furniture a thin straw mattress and a cracked wooden stool. She sank onto the bed and buried her face in her hands. Her body ached and her mind spun with fear and uncertainty. Yet somewhere deep inside, a small spark refused to die, a spark of defiance, of hope, of life. The night settled over the city like a heavy cloak. Through the cracks in the stone walls, Elara could see the glow of the palace torches and hear the distant echoes of guards' footsteps. Sleep did not come easily. She thought of her family, of the farm left behind, of her mother's worn hands and her father's worried eyes. They had sold her out of desperation, yet she could not hate them fully. Survival demanded understanding. Suddenly the door creaked. Elara froze, heart hammering. A shadow appeared in the doorway, Kalen himself. He stepped inside without invitation, his presence filling the room, dark and commanding. "Do not be afraid," he said, though his voice carried the weight of authority. "I did not come to harm you." Elara rose, her instincts on edge. "Why are you here, my lord?" Kalen's gaze softened just slightly, enough to make her notice that beneath the cold exterior there was something human. "Most slaves have nothing to offer me. You are different," she frowned. "Different how?" "You survive. You do not beg, you do not cry. You endure. And yet," he paused as if searching for the right words, "there is fire in you. A fire I do not often see. I need people who can stand beside me, not cower before me." Elara's heart pounded. Could she trust him? Could she dare to hope that this man, feared by all, might see her not as a slave, but as more? She knew better than to believe such fantasies could last. The palace was a web of danger. and Kalen was a king who could destroy without a thought. I do not know what to say, she whispered. Then say nothing, he replied. Watch, learn, survive. That is enough, for now. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. Tomorrow you will come to the hall at dawn. There will be a choice for you, one that will determine your path. Choose wisely, Alara, for it may not only change your life, but the fate of many. The words hung in the air long after he left. Alara sat on her straw mattress, the candle flickering and casting shadows across the cold walls. A choice? Tomorrow she would face a decision unlike any she had ever known. Sleep finally claimed her, restless and uneasy. Her dreams were filled with shadows of the throne hall, of Kalen's piercing eyes, and of the fire that now seemed to burn within her. She could feel the pull of destiny, like a thread winding tightly around her heart, drawing her toward something she did not yet understand. Dawn came with a muted glow, slipping through the cracks in her room. Alara rose, her body stiff, her mind racing. The palace seemed alive with whispers, servants hurrying, guards glancing her way, courtiers moving like shadows. Today would not be ordinary. She made her way to the hall, every step echoing through the stone corridors. When she entered, Kalen was already there, seated on his throne, watching her with the same unreadable intensity. You have come, he said simply. Good. You have survived the night, but the day will test you further. Choices are never free in this world, Alara. Every action has consequence. You may act as you wish, but remember, I am always watching. Alara's stomach tightened. She nodded, knowing that in this place the difference between life and death was often determined by a single word. A single glance, a single misstep. Kalen stood, descending from the throne, and for the first time, he looked directly at her with something other than command. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps respect. You may serve, he said, but not as others do. Learn quickly, adapt quickly. Those who cannot survive my court, vanish. Alara swallowed hard. The weight of the words pressed against her chest, but she straightened, lifted her chin, and allowed herself a small flicker of pride. She had survived the journey, the auction, the palace. Perhaps she could survive this as well. And then, just as she began to breathe again, Kalen's voice dropped, low and deliberate. Or, you may walk away from this life entirely. But know this, Alara, there is no true escape in my kingdom. Even a slave carries power she does not yet understand. The word sent a shiver down her spine. Power she did not yet understand. What could he mean? And yet, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, a spark of something dangerous and thrilling kindled within her. The choice awaited her. Tomorrow her path would be revealed. And already Alara sensed that nothing, neither palace walls nor chains nor fear, would ever feel the same again. The fire had begun to burn, and the shadows of fate had just started to stir. The next morning, the palace was alive with movement and whispers. Alara's hands shook as she made her way through the grand corridors, guided by a quiet servant who knew little of her story. Every shadow seemed to stretch and twist, hiding unknown eyes. She felt as though the walls themselves watched her, waiting for a misstep. The throne hall was empty except for Kalen, who stood near the grand windows, the morning sun glinting off his dark armor. His figure was imposing, yet there was something in the way he stood, slightly restless, as if the weight of unseen chains pressed on his shoulders. You are here, he said, his voice calm but firm. Good, today begins the lessons. You will learn the palace, its dangers, and its rules. Observe carefully, for what you do not see may be your undoing. Alara nodded, trying to steady her voice. Yes, my lord. Kalen studied her again, his gaze like steel wrapped in fire. You are not like other slaves. You do not tremble at fear or grovel at command. That will serve you well, if you can survive what comes next. He turned and gestured for her to follow. The corridors twisted like a labyrinth, some halls lit with warm torchlight, others cloaked in darkness. They passed courtiers who barely glanced at her, servants who whispered her name, and guards who nodded respectfully. The palace, she realized, was not just a home or a fortress. It was a living entity, shifting and breathing with secrets. Watch and remember, Kalen said, stopping before a large chamber. Every face, every movement here has meaning. Those who serve the wrong master or speak in the wrong tone vanish quietly. Never forget this, Alara's heart pounded. She had already survived the journey, the auction, the chains, but this was something else entirely. For hours she followed Kalen through the palace, observing everything. He introduced her to ministers, warriors, and advisors, though his explanations were sparse. "Notice their expressions," he said. "Notice what they hide. A kingdom is built on appearances, but true power lies in understanding the truth beneath the mask." Ilara learned quickly, relying on instinct and careful observation. She began to see cracks in Kalen's reputation. Yes, he was feared, but there was a sharp intelligence behind the cruelty. He tested everyone, forcing them to reveal who they truly were. And beneath the armor of command, she caught fleeting glimpses of a man weighed down by responsibilities he could not abandon. By midday, her legs ached, but Kalen had more in store. "You will work in my private chambers," he said, "not as a servant of menial tasks, but as one who watches, learns, and adapts. You may think this is punishment, but it is opportunity. Many would die for this chance, yet few survive it." The chambers were vast, filled with maps, scrolls, and artifacts from battles long past. Ilara ran her fingers along the wooden tables, feeling the weight of history pressing down on her. Here, Kalen revealed another side of himself. He spoke of strategy, of battles won and lost, of kingdoms balanced on a knife's edge. His words were harsh but precise, a mixture of intellect and unyielding command. As the day wore on, Ilara felt the pull of exhaustion and curiosity. She had seen the shadow of his power, but also the flicker of loneliness hidden behind it. Kalen's presence was overwhelming, every movement calculated, every glance measured. And yet there were moments when he seemed almost human, a man longing for something he could not name. That evening, as the sun dipped below the towers and the sky turned to shades of violet and blood red, Kalen summoned her to the balcony. The city stretched beneath them, a sea of stone and firelight. The wind tugged at her hair, and for a moment she felt free, as if the chains of her past could fall away entirely. "You see the kingdom," he said, his voice low. "You see what is expected. But there is more. Always more. Those who fail to understand it are consumed by it." Ilara turned to him, searching for a hint of meaning. "And those who survive?" she asked. Kalen's eyes met hers, sharp as a blade yet soft as smoke. "Those who survive may find power they never imagined, or they may find danger greater than any chains." There was a pause, the air thick with unspoken tension. Ilara realized the truth of his words. This was more than survival. It was a test of her spirit, her mind, her courage, and she could feel herself changing already. Stronger, sharper, more alert. Fear had not left her, but it no longer ruled her. "Do you understand?" Kalen asked. "Yes, my lord," she replied. Yet her heart whispered that she only understood part of the truth. That night she returned to her quarters, weary but awake with thought. The palace seemed different in darkness, more alive somehow, filled with shadows that whispered secrets. She could feel Kalen's presence lingering. Though he was far away, something in him had touched her. Not kindness, not cruelty, but recognition. He had seen her, truly seen her in a way no one else had. Sleep was uneasy. Dreams of fire and stone, of shadows moving in the hallways, of Kalen's piercing gaze haunted her rest. She dreamed of chains breaking, of a life she had never known, of a destiny calling her from the depths of despair. She woke with the taste of ash on her lips, her heart pounding, the first stirrings of something dangerous and thrilling, an emotion she did not yet understand. The next day brought another trial. Kalen summoned her to witness the court in session. Ilara had to learn quickly, to read every gesture, every word, every glance. Ministers debated, advisors schemed, and Kalen watched, silent and observant, the very air around him vibrating with authority. A dispute erupted over the kingdom's borders. Voices rose, accusations flew, and the court seemed poised on the edge of chaos. Ilara noticed the subtle shifts. A hand on a sword, a flicker of fear in a counselor's eye, a smile that did not reach the lips. Kalen remained still, watching, waiting. And then, without warning, he intervened, his command precise, unyielding, bending the argument to his will without a single raised voice. Ilara was stunned. Power like that was not just physical, it was strategy, presence, control over the very hearts of men. She realized then that the man before her was not merely feared. He was revered, a force of nature contained within mortal form. Kalen turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Do you see?" he asked. "Yes, my lord," she said softly. "I see. Good," he replied. "Then remember, survival here is not about strength alone. It is about understanding, about patience, about knowing when to act and when to wait. For the first time, Alara felt a connection, fragile but real. She was no longer just a slave. She was a student, a witness, a part of something far larger than herself. And yet she also understood the danger. One wrong move, one lapse in judgment, and she could vanish from this palace forever. As night fell again, Kaelin visited her chambers. He did not speak at first, merely watched her, the candlelight flickering across his sharp features. "You are learning quickly," he said finally, "faster than I expected. Most would crumble under the pressure, yet you endure. That is unusual." Ilara met his gaze. "I have no choice but to endure." He nodded as if acknowledging the truth. "Perhaps. Or perhaps there is something in you that refuses to be broken. That intrigues me." The words sent a shiver through her. She did not understand entirely what he meant, but she felt it, an unspoken tension, a bond forming in the shadows of the palace. Something neither of them could name, yet both felt. Kaelin turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Tomorrow the real test begins. A choice will be offered, one that may change everything. Be ready, Alara. And remember, in my world, freedom is never given lightly. It must be earned, or taken." The door closed behind him, leaving her in darkness and silence. Yet the spark inside her refused to die. It flared like a small flame in the night, a promise of power, courage, and perhaps something more. Alara lay on her straw mattress, heart racing, mind alive with possibilities. She knew that the Alpha King's shadow would follow her every step, that his gaze would test her, that his presence would challenge her in ways she had never imagined. And she also knew deep in her bones that she would not run, she would endure. She would survive. And when the choice came, she would face it, not as a slave, but as someone who had begun to understand her own strength. The dawn broke cold and gray. The palace bathed in a muted light that did little to soften the shadows within its walls. Ilara moved silently through the corridors, her mind still racing from the previous day's lessons. Kaelin's words echoed in her mind. Freedom must be earned or taken. Today was different. Today she was not merely observing. Today she would face the choice he had promised, a test that would determine her path. She entered the throne hall, the stone floors glinting faintly with the morning light. Courtiers whispered behind their hands, and servants hurried past, all eyes subtly fixed on her. Kaelin waited, standing beneath the high arch of the throne room. His dark eyes followed her every step, unblinking, unreadable. The air between them seemed to tighten, charged with a current that neither spoke aloud. "You have been attentive," he said, his voice low, carrying authority without raising it. "You understand more than most who enter this place. But understanding alone is not enough." Ilara nodded, her hands clenched at her sides.
"I am ready, my lord." Kaelin inclined his head slightly, and the chamber doors opened to reveal a smaller, private hall she had never seen before.
There, two paths lay before her. On one side, a room lined with weapons and maps representing strength, strategy, and command. On the other, a quiet chamber filled with scrolls, books, and artifacts of the court, representing knowledge, influence, and subtle power. "You must choose your path," Kaelin said. "One will place you at my side as a shadow, guiding, learning, and surviving the court. The other will place you in direct service, close enough to influence, close enough to observe, yet far enough to remain unseen. Both paths are dangerous. Both paths offer power, but in very different ways." Alara's pulse quickened. It was not merely a test of obedience, it was a test of insight, courage, and foresight. Choosing wrong could doom her, yet choosing well could elevate her far beyond the life of a slave. She hesitated, weighing her instincts against her fears. Her eyes flicked to Kaelin, whose expression betrayed nothing yet seemed to invite her to act, to step forward, to claim something she had never known. Finally, she stepped toward the chamber of knowledge. Her fingers brushed the edges of the scrolls as she entered, feeling the weight of history, power, and secrets pressing around her. Kaelin's gaze followed her, and for a moment she thought she saw a flicker of approval. "Very well," he said. "Then you shall learn not just the actions of men, but the truths behind them." The days that followed were filled with lessons unlike any Alara had imagined. She studied court politics, the alliances and betrayals hidden behind polite words. She learned to read expressions, notice small gestures, and predict the moves of those who sought to undermine the throne. Each day Kaelin tested her, sometimes directly, sometimes through indirect challenges, pushing her to think, to act, to survive under pressure. And yet, something more insidious began to grow between them, subtle but undeniable. In the quiet moments when Kaylin watched her work or spoke of strategy, their eyes met, lingering longer than necessary. Words carried double meanings, silences spoke louder than commands, and every interaction left a spark neither could ignore. Elara found herself drawn to him, despite fear, despite the knowledge that he was dangerous. Kaylin, too, seemed caught in a web he could not easily unravel. He had not been touched by someone like her in years, someone who could challenge his mind without defying his authority outright. One evening, as rain lashed against the palace windows, Kaylin summoned her to the library. The chamber smelled of old parchment and firewood, the light flickering from a single hearth. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, yet inside, a tension heavier than the storm filled the room. "You have learned quickly," Kaylin said, his voice softer than usual, faster than I expected. Elara looked up, meeting his gaze. "I have to, my lord. I cannot afford to fail." He stepped closer, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "Failure here is not just personal. It can cost lives. Not yours alone." Elara's heart pounded. His proximity was disorienting, his intensity almost tangible. Yet beneath the authority there was a vulnerability he could not entirely mask, a burden he carried in silence. She realized then that the king she had feared was also a man trapped by destiny, bound by expectation and history. Suddenly, the doors to the library creaked open. A courtier slipped inside, bowing low. Kaylin's eyes flicked toward the intruder, sharp and commanding. "Explain yourself," the man stammered, reporting a minor but dangerous plot against the throne. Kaylin listened, then dismissed him with a single gesture. Elara had watched closely, noting every micro-expression, every hesitation. She realized she could predict not just the actions of the courtier, but the ripple effects of his words throughout the palace. Kaylin turned back to her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You are learning faster than most would dare. You see what others miss," Elara swallowed. "I am trying, my lord." "You are more than trying," he said quietly. "You are changing the way I see this court. And perhaps even myself." The words left her breathless. She had never expected acknowledgement, let alone something that felt like admiration from the man she had feared most. Yet even as a thrill of pride rose within her, she knew better than to mistake it for simple kindness. Kaylin's world was one of shadows, and his intentions were never fully revealed. Days passed, and the palace became a crucible. Elara faced small intrigues, subtle betrayals, and whispered threats. She acted carefully, always aware of Kaylin's presence, aware of the delicate tension between them. Every glance, every word seemed loaded with unspoken meaning. One night, Kaylin summoned her to the balcony once more. The city below was alive with lantern light, the distant river reflecting gold and fire. The wind tugged at her cloak, carrying the scent of rain and smoke. "You have done well," Kaylin said, his voice almost lost to the wind. "Better than I imagined." Elara hesitated. "I do not know if I am ready for all this, my lord. I am still learning." "Learning is never complete," he replied. "Even kings must learn, even rulers must adapt. Do you see now why survival is not enough?" She nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle deep within her. Survival was just the beginning. To endure, to thrive, to rise, it required understanding, courage, and perhaps something more. Kaylin stepped closer, the shadows of the balcony wrapping around them. "There is a fire in you," he said, voice low and intense. "It is dangerous. It is rare, and it intrigues me." Elara's breath caught. She had expected command, caution, or warning, but not this. Something unspoken passed between them, a tension neither could ignore. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor. Kaylin's expression hardened. "Go to your quarters," he commanded almost sharply. "And remember what you have learned today. Nothing here is accidental, nothing is trivial. And trust must be earned carefully." Elara bowed and retreated, heart racing, mind swirling. She had glimpsed something she could not yet name, something dangerous, thrilling, and deeply complicated. Her path was becoming clearer, yet more treacherous with every passing day. As she lay on her mattress that night, staring at the flickering candle, Elara realized that her life in the palace had changed forever. She was no longer merely a slave, no longer merely a girl trying to survive. She had begun to shape her own destiny. walking the line between fear and courage, obedience and power, uncertainty and the fire that now burned within her. And somewhere in the depths of the palace, Kaelin watched from the shadows, thinking of the girl who defied his expectations, and perhaps, for the first time in years, of the man who might not be alone in the darkness. The palace felt different at night. The corridors were longer, darker, and full of secrets that whispered in the silence. Alara moved cautiously, aware that even a small mistake could unravel everything she had worked for. She had begun to understand the rhythm of Kaelin's world, the hidden loyalties, the quiet threats, the games of power played behind polished doors. Kaelin watched her from a distance, silent and imposing. He did not need to speak to make his presence felt. The shadows seemed to cling to him, and every gesture carried authority. Yet beneath the mask of control, Alara sensed a tension she had never seen before. He was a king burdened by responsibility, by the weight of his choices, and by the darkness that seemed to follow him wherever he went. "Tonight, you will learn more than any book or lesson can teach," Kaelin said as he appeared beside her in the quiet of the palace library. His eyes were sharp, focused, and unreadable. "You will face a trial that will test your mind, your courage, and your loyalty. Be prepared." Alara nodded, though her heart raced. Each day had tested her, but the weight of this unknown trial pressed heavier than ever. She had learned to navigate the court, to read the subtle movements of the courtiers and to anticipate danger, yet she could feel the edge of something far greater approaching. The trial began with a summons from the council. Alara entered a chamber she had never seen before, where high-ranking nobles and advisors gathered, their faces masks of politeness hiding sharper intentions. Kaelin's throne loomed at the far end, a silent reminder of power that ruled over all. "Alara," Kaelin said, his voice carrying through the hall, "observe, decide, and act. Your choice here will define not only your path but the balance of the court." The council erupted into arguments over border disputes, accusations of betrayal, and whispers of plots against the throne. Alara watched every gesture, every glance, every subtle movement. She began to understand the depth of Kaelin's power, not just in command but in observation, in knowing who would move first and who would falter. A noblewoman whispered to another, plotting in the shadows. Alara caught it. She recognized the silent signals of treachery, the way intentions were hidden behind courtesy. Without hesitation, she spoke to Kaelin in a quiet voice, pointing out the deception. Kaelin's eyes flicked to her, a flash of surprise and approval crossing his features. "Good," he said, barely above a whisper. "You see what others miss. That is what I expect from those who serve at my side." The council erupted into chaos as Kaelin acted, silencing the plot before it could take root. Alara felt a surge of pride, though she knew better than to celebrate openly. In the palace, success was often a prelude to a new challenge, a sharper test, or an unexpected betrayal. After the council dispersed, Kaelin summoned Alara to the balcony. The city stretched below them, a sea of stone and firelight, the air heavy with the scent of rain and smoke. "You performed well," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Yet there is more to power than observation. Courage, timing, and judgment must come together. You have shown glimpses, but the real test is ahead." Alara looked at him, her pulse quickening. "I will do whatever is required, my lord." Kaelin studied her for a long moment. "It is not just duty, Alara. It is more than obedience. It is understanding the weight of choice and knowing when to act and when to wait." The wind tugged at her cloak, carrying the scent of the city below. In that moment, she understood what he meant. This was no longer about survival. It was about stepping into the dangerous spaces where kings and queens shaped the world with their decisions. And in those spaces, trust was rare, loyalty fragile, and a single misstep could bring ruin. That night, Kaelin visited her chambers once more. His presence was commanding, yet there was a subtle softness, a hint of vulnerability hidden beneath the shadows. "You are learning quickly," he said, "faster than I expected, and yet you carry yourself with caution, with patience. That is wise." Alara looked up, meeting his gaze. "I have no choice but to be careful. One mistake could destroy everything," he nodded. "Indeed, and yet, courage is often born in the face of fear. Do not let caution blind you to opportunity." Their eyes held, and for a brief moment the tension between them shifted. It was no longer just about duty, observation, or survival. There was an unspoken connection, a pull neither could name but both felt. The spark that had begun to grow in the days past now flared more intensely, a dangerous and thrilling energy that left her breathless. "You understand," Kaelin said, finally breaking the silence, "that in my world power is not given lightly. It must be earned, or claimed." Elara nodded, her heart pounding. She had begun to see the truth of his words. The palace, the court, the kingdom itself, it was a web of influence, shadows, and secrets. To survive and rise, she would need every ounce of courage, intelligence, and intuition she possessed. The next day brought news that unsettled the entire palace. A group of mercenaries loyal to a rival lord had infiltrated the outskirts of the kingdom. Rumors of treachery and betrayal spread like wildfire. Kaelin acted swiftly, calling his council to strategize, his eyes constantly shifting to Elara. "You will observe closely," he instructed. "You may offer insight, but speak only when necessary. This is not merely about survival. It is about understanding the currents that move beneath the surface." Elara watched, analyzed, and anticipated, noting the subtle fears and hidden intentions of the advisors. When a suggestion arose that could have led to disaster, she spoke quietly, offering a solution that Kaelin had not yet considered. His eyes met hers, and a rare smile flickered, brief, fleeting, but undeniable. "Well done," he whispered. "You have begun to see the balance of power and the weight of choice." As the weeks passed, Elara became more than a student of the court. She became a partner in thought, a presence Kaelin could not ignore. Their bond deepened, complicated and unspoken. She noticed the way he watched her, the moments of vulnerability he allowed in private, the subtle shifts in his expression when she spoke truthfully or acted with courage. And yet, danger lurked constantly. Plots and conspiracies continued to unfold. Courtiers whispered in corners and shadows moved with intent. Elara knew that every victory was temporary, every moment of trust precarious. She also knew that the bond forming between her and Kaelin was as perilous as it was exhilarating. One evening, a messenger arrived with urgent news. The rival lord had sent envoys, offering tribute and pledges of loyalty, but the words were hollow. Kaelin summoned Elara to the council chambers, and together they reviewed the envoy's documents, reading between the lines, analyzing each gesture and phrase. "You see what others miss," Kaelin said softly, after she pointed out a subtle contradiction in the text. "You are becoming indispensable." Elara felt a flush of pride, though tempered by the knowledge of the stakes. She was rising, yes, but the higher she climbed, the more dangerous her position became. The shadows of power were long and deep, and a single misstep could mean her undoing, or worse. That night, as she returned to her quarters, she paused at the balcony. The city spread below her, alive with lantern light, smoke curling into the sky. Somewhere in the distance, Kaelin's silhouette could be seen against the moonlight, a solitary figure in a world of intrigue and danger. Elara realized that she no longer feared him in the same way. She respected him, yes, and understood the danger he carried. But she also felt a pull, an attraction, a connection that neither had spoken aloud but that simmered in the spaces between their words, their glances, their shared victories and challenges. The fire within her had grown stronger, fueled not just by survival but by courage, intelligence, and the thrill of the unknown. And somewhere deep in her heart she understood that the trial was far from over. The real challenges, both in the court and within herself, were yet to come. As she lay down, the candlelight flickering across her walls, Elara felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. She had become a part of the palace, a part of Kaelin's shadow, and yet she was also aware that every step forward was fraught with peril. The line between survival and disaster was thin, and trust was the most dangerous currency of all. She closed her eyes, listening to the distant echoes of the palace, the whispers, the footfalls, the heartbeat of a kingdom that demanded courage, cunning, and the fire of those bold enough to claim their place within it. The palace was restless that morning. A tension hummed through the halls like the low growl of distant thunder. Elara awoke to the murmur of hurried footsteps, the clatter of armor, and the soft metallic ringing that echoed through stone corridors. Today was no ordinary day. Today, she would face the culmination of every lesson, every trial, every subtle test Kaelin had given her since her arrival. Kaelin stood in the throne room, his dark silhouette cutting a commanding figure against the morning light streaming through towering windows. He did not speak at first, only observed her as she entered. noting the way she carried herself now, confident, poised yet cautious. She had changed. She was no longer the terrified girl sold into slavery. She was someone who could face a king and not flinch. "Ilara," Kalen said finally, his voice carrying the weight of authority and the faintest edge of something warmer, something personal. "The trial begins now. Your choices will decide more than your place in this court. They may decide the fate of this kingdom." Ilara swallowed. She had anticipated danger, intrigue, and tests of her intellect, but there was an undeniable thrill in the stakes. Every sense in her was alert, every muscle coiled like a spring. The council chamber had been transformed into a war room. Maps lined the walls, candles burned low, and advisors spoke in hushed tones. Kalen motioned for her to join him at the table. "You will lead today," he said simply. "Observe, decide, act. Your judgment will guide our actions." Ilara felt her heart pound. Leading in a room filled with king's advisors, warriors, and schemers was more terrifying than any battle she had imagined. And yet, beneath the fear, there was a fire, a clarity that had grown inside her since she had begun this journey. The day was a blur of decisions, strategy, and calculated risks. Ilara noticed the subtle cues of those who sought to manipulate outcomes, the careful movements of those who hid ambition behind courtesy, and the quiet gestures of loyalty that often went unseen. She spoke, suggested, and guided the actions of the council. Kalen watched, silent but present, his eyes never leaving her, giving her just enough space to shine while reminding her that he remained the ultimate authority. Hours passed, and finally, the council dispersed. A rival lord's attack had been averted, alliances secured, and the kingdom's borders reinforced. Ilara had not only survived the day, she had guided the decisions that saved countless lives. Kalen approached her as the last advisors departed. His expression was unreadable at first, then softened ever so slightly. "You have done well," he said almost quietly. "More than well. You have proven something few could. Not just intelligence or courage, but discernment, patience, and insight." Ilara's chest swelled with pride, but she knew better than to let it blind her. "Thank you, my lord," she said. "I only did what I could." He studied her, and for the first time his eyes lingered not as a ruler observing a subordinate, but as a man seeing another soul in full. "You have done more than survive. You have grown." The tension between them, which had simmered since her arrival, now rose to the surface, undeniable yet unspoken. Kalen stepped closer, and Ilara felt the pull she had tried to ignore, the fire of recognition, attraction, and something deeper that neither had dared name. "I am impressed," Kalen said, his voice soft but firm, "and am intrigued. You have changed everything in this court, perhaps even me." Ilara's breath caught. She understood him now. Not just the king, the warrior, the ruler, but the man beneath the shadow of his crown. She realized she did not fear him. She respected him, trusted him, and in ways she had never imagined, cared for him. Before words could pass between them, a messenger arrived with urgent news. Another threat loomed. An assassin had infiltrated the palace, intent on striking at Kalen. Ilara's instincts, sharpened by weeks of observation and training, kicked in. "This way," she said, leading Kalen through hidden passages she had memorized, every step precise, every turn calculated. Shadows clung to them as they moved silently through the labyrinth of the palace, the storm outside echoing the tension within. They arrived at the chamber where the assassin was poised, dagger raised. Without hesitation, Ilara acted. She called out the intruder's bluff, moved swiftly, and disarmed him with a combination of strategy and courage. Kalen, impressed but not surprised, moved beside her, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder, a touch that conveyed both authority and acknowledgement of her strength. The assassin was captured, and the threat neutralized. Ilara stood beside Kalen, breathing heavily, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. For a moment, the storm outside and the storm inside the palace seemed to mirror the storm within her own heart. "You were remarkable," Kalen said, his voice low, not just in action but in judgment. "You have earned more than recognition today. You have earned my trust." Ilara looked at him, the weight of his words settling deep within her. Trust from a man like Kalen was rare, precious, and dangerous. Yet it was also the first sign of equality she had ever received in a world that had treated her as worthless. As night fell, the palace quieted, and the storm outside faded to gentle rain. Kaelin summoned her to the balcony once more. The city lay beneath them, lights shimmering like fireflies against the dark. The wind tugged at her hair, the scent of rain and earth filling her senses. "You have grown into someone formidable, Elara," Kaelin said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Not merely as a servant or observer, but as someone who can stand at my side. As an equal." As something more, Elara's heart raced. The unspoken connection that had simmered between them for weeks now demanded recognition. I have only tried to survive, my lord," she said softly. "Survival is the beginning," Kaelin replied. "But you have done more than survive. You have changed everything, and now I offer you a choice." He reached out his hand, not as a king commanding a subject, but as a man offering trust and partnership. "Stay by my side, not as a servant, not as a slave, but as my equal, my confidant, my queen." Elara felt a warmth spread through her chest. The journey from worthless slave to trusted partner, from fear to courage, had brought her here. The chains of her past were gone, replaced by the possibility of a future she had never dared to imagine. "I accept," she said, her voice steady, full of conviction. "I will stand by your side." Kaelin's eyes softened, the weight of his crown and the burdens of his rule momentarily fading in the quiet triumph of the moment. He took her hand, placing it gently within his own. The power between them shifted, not a king commanding a subject, but two souls bound by trust, respect, and something far deeper than either had expected. The city below them seemed to pause, the night holding its breath. In that moment, Elara understood that she was no longer the girl sold as worthless, no longer a shadow in the corridors of power. She had survived, adapted, and risen, earning not only her place in the palace, but a bond with the man who had once seemed untouchable, a man whose shadow now intertwined with her own. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Kaelin drew her close. "Together," he whispered, "we face whatever comes next, not as master and servant, but as partners, as equals." Elara nodded, her heart full, her spirit unbroken. The palace, the kingdom, and the shadows within it no longer seemed as daunting. She had found her strength, her voice, and her place beside the man who had once seemed untouchable, a man who now saw her not as a slave, but as his queen. And in the quiet moments that followed, as the palace awoke to a new day, the storm outside and the storm within her heart merged into one, a promise of courage, love, and the power to shape their destiny together.